First, we want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Hopefully y'all can hear me and see Tim's screen as well with the crisis averted slide on it. On behalf of Tim, Air, and myself, I want to thank you for joining us. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about our recommendations, our perspectives on how best to manage complex compliance-related issues in the medical device industry, how to try to prevent those from becoming crises for an organization. We're going to walk through some examples to go from there. What I do want to say is we target this, when Tim and I created this presentation, we targeted it for the medical device industry, but in reality, most of this content we're going to share really applies to any kind of business-related challenges that an organization may be dealing with, kind of these unexpected challenges. Tim, would you advance, please? Two additional comments while that's advancing. First of all, told by Tyler that this presentation will be recorded, that will be made available. Also, we ask that if you have any questions, please, there's the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please actively use that. We definitely want to make this as interactive as we can, rather than us just standing or sitting here and presenting out to you guys. So before we get into the presentation, a little bit about who we are and who we represent. So Tim, Air, and I, my colleague Tim and I, we represent Integrated Project Management Company, IPM for short. IPM, I like to say it's a business consulting firm that specializes in applying project management best practices, combined with unique and kind of deep medical device industry knowledge and other unique kind of areas of services to deliver solutions for our clients. You can see a little bit my role as a managing director. I manage IPM's Central Region, which consists of offices in the Twin Cities, in Chicagoland, and in St. Louis. Tim Air, he is our director of our Twin Cities operation as well, our operations director. IPM's been around for 35 years now, founded in 1988. Lots of experience along the way. Very proud to have been recognized and awarded the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. Hopefully many of you know what that is, but something we're quite proud of, and that was in 2018, kind of really reflects our mentality about continuous improvements and high levels of quality. You can see on the right, I like to say these are our service areas. Project management based, very execution focused, hands-on, but in these general categories. And lastly, across the bottom, those are where we're located. So it's about all I wanted to say about IPM this time. So let's go ahead and get started. Disruptive compliance challenge. Really, what are we trying to get at here? When we talk about, when Tim and I are representing these disruptive compliance challenges, these are issues that come up that businesses are confronted with that aren't part of normal operations. They could take many different shapes and sizes. You can see 6 different examples. I think for those who are in the medical device industry, all of these should be very familiar. Of course, the EU MDR is the big, very obvious one, and so many companies are still working through their efforts to achieve compliance with that. But there can be even more sudden and unexpected ones. A warning letter comes in and just catches the organization by surprise, or recall, be it as it may. These are challenges that organizations are often not staffed for, not equipped for, and they have to react to. And that reacting mode creates challenges for an organization. Let's see if there's anything else I want to add into that. I'm going to talk about this for a few slides, just really at a high level to set the context of what we're trying to talk about here with compliance challenges and how we recommend companies prepare for these things and position themselves so they are as prepared and adaptive as they can be. Tim's going to take it and dive into more detail about when a challenge becomes more of a crisis. How do you prevent that from becoming a disaster for an organization? So a little bit about disruptive compliance events, compliance challenges. What are some of the implications of this? The reason we really wanted to talk about this is, as I said, organizations are typically often not structured for these kinds of things. So when something does come in, whether you have a long runway like an EU MDR, maybe what if it's a shorter surprise thing, a warning letter, either way, organizations have to change, they have to react to it, they have to either assign new resources or reassign the resource responsibilities so that you address this thing. So there could be a distraction, a dilution issue for your resources. Organizational priorities, your strategic priorities can be impacted as the organization redirects their investments, redirects their efforts to the compliance issue and away from potentially more exciting things, more growth-related things, those innovative investments. All of it tying to, what are potential impacts of these delays, possible delays to new products, getting out in the market, possible impacts to global, revenue in the marketplace. So point of this, very high level, a lot of other potential implications, but these challenges that come in that organizations are not prepared for create issues for an organization. They distract, they can dilute resources, and they can redirect focus to other things and away from those things that are more exciting, growth-related, new innovation, all those types of areas. And we certainly want to minimize these negative impacts to an organization as a result from these disruptions. So maybe a little bit more philosophically, we like to call organizations that are really prepared adaptive organizations. You can see a definition here about an adaptive organization. Adaptive organizations, they learn from such events. They build their structure and such so they're better prepared for the future, or they minimize the risk of such events in the future. As I say, philosophically, absolutely encourage our clients to be as adaptive as they can, as they learn from these experiences, not only address the issue, but try to do everything you can to prevent them in the future, invest the time and effort necessary to do so. Much easier said than done. It requires certainly a philosophical change, organizational change, perspective in an organization, and that's not always easy to do. Certain things at a high level, again, I'll speak about this very conceptually. Obviously, we can dive into much more detail, but what are some of those things that organizations can do to be adaptive as opposed to truly reactive and as to, minimize that disruption when something comes in? 6 different examples here. There are plenty more. Some things organizations can do are very tangible. As IPM, we're strong advocates for project management, strong advocates for smart portfolio management. So we always recommend, and we work with our clients also to implement project management, right-size project management capabilities so that companies can deliver their projects and deliver these types of challenges in a reliable, effective, efficient way, maximizing the value and how you use your leveraging resources to do so. Portfolio management. Can't just accept this without implications or maybe trade-offs with the rest of the organization. So establishing project portfolio management processes that align the selection of the right projects with your strategic priorities, including when these disruptive events come in, those will typically become strategic priorities. But you select and assign these projects in consideration of organizational capacity, the ability to get them done, what might be the trade-off, what needs to drop off, because certainly not everything can be done with limited resources in the organization. So again, a tangible approach that can set a company up to be better prepared for these types of events. Not all things are so tangible. We talk about an organizational change management mindset. This is something that takes time, takes effort. We could do a whole hour-long presentation on organizational change and how do you change the mentality of the overall organization from the top to the bottom to accept and adapt to changes with the right mindset here and not be so resistant. But certainly that is something we work with our clients to try to achieve and improve. The idea of risk management, of monitoring what may be regulatory changes, that timely assessment of regulatory changes. We all knew the EU MDR was coming, a long runway. Some companies, as we've learned, has been pretty well publicized, have not responded and reacted as well as others. The idea of characterizing what needs to be done? What are the impacts of these changes to the organization, and how do we address them, and ultimately what needs to be done to achieve compliance? Doing it in a timely manner sets the organization up for success. Waiting, delaying, deferring sets up risks and potential for problems down the road, and any number of other examples here as well. The idea is to be proactive, minimize the reactive as much as you can, and also learn from these, and then so that you make a stronger organization moving forward. Advantages of an adaptive organization. I think most of this is fairly obvious, but kind of starts at the top. Management approval, management being on board, management advocating for the right things. Something certainly when an issue comes in, management, senior management has to be on board. They have to set the right example, but when they do, the organization usually follows. We talk about the risk of resource overload. Can't just take on a new project and continue trying to manage the other projects. That can create stress, it can dilution, impact morale as well. So adaptive organizations try to minimize those negative impacts and get the most out of the resources in the right application of their talents. You want to manage compliance projects in balance and kind of looking at the entire portfolio. By doing so, you're making the right decisions about trade-offs. And then doing it the right way, it just gets an alignment of organizational resources. It helps to ensure that people not only make the right decisions and align to those decisions, but then changes are sustained. Some examples about adaptive organizations, some of the advantages of adaptive organizations. And my last slide kind of talked about a simple or maybe an obvious example. Mentioned earlier, a large compliance change, so EU MDR. We've known about it for a long time, published to organizations well before it was ever kind of mandated and established in the regulations. An adaptive organization would have responded. You can see the timeline across the top, understanding, assessing what are the impacts for the organization, what needs to be done in order to achieve compliance, all of the work, all of the investment, how long that kind of takes, really a programmatic approach, a disciplined programmatic approach to the program, to this compliance program. Doing it right still causes disruptions, still causes trade-offs, but you're establishing an adaptive organization will establish itself so you can successfully achieve compliance with the MDR, minimize the risk to products not being able to be continue to be marketed within the EU, and hopefully minimize the other stress and strain that a large compliance program can cause an organization in the form of morale issues and other types of issues. So adaptive organization responds quickly, plans things out, and charts their path forward. Unfortunately, not all organizations have chosen a more adaptive and proactive approach. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Hopefully that at least set a little bit of the context for what Tim's going to talk about.
Thanks, Andy. Again, my name is Tim Ayer, and director at IPM in Minnesota. So far, what we really covered is these challenges and just the disruption that create. But now, kind of laying a little bit of context. When does a challenge actually become a crisis? So to kind of lay a little bit of framework on this, first of all, crisis doesn't mean that people are running around chaotically. And kind of let me describe from a business perspective, maybe how a crisis could be viewed. So imagine yourself for a moment, you're driving across country, maybe South Dakota or Nebraska, you're out in the country, you kind of see this picture on the slide. Imagine yourself out in the country driving along. You're trying to get to somewhere. It's something important that you want to get to, but along the way, right? Maybe you get a little distracted. You find yourself caught on the lip on the side of the road. You drift off. Not too bad. All of a sudden, now you have a challenge on your hands, right? Your car's in there. You put in reverse. You can't get back out, and so you begin to like, how do I get this out? All right, I have a challenge. I'm not in trouble. I give myself an extra 2 hours to get where I'm going. So I start working on this, and I'm working on it and trying various things. And lo and behold, about 45 minutes later, you're not out, and you're starting to run out of time in order to get to this important thing that you're trying to get to. And so you're not having success. So you think, well, I know, I'll go to my backup plan. I will call a tow truck. So you pull out your cell phone, you go to call. Oh my gosh, I don't have any cell service. Of course, I'm in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska. So now you are looking around and you think, well, are there any houses nearby? Well, no, I don't see any houses nearby. And it dawns on you that in the 45 minutes or so that you've been working on getting your car out, there have been no other cars on the road. All of a sudden, what was a challenge, just getting the car out, now becomes a crisis. Instead of you getting to your destination, you're not going to get to your destination. And now you're thinking about, am I going to be able to keep warm? When will I be able to get out of this thing? Will I have water? Will I need food? Will I run out of gas, etc.? So when we define a crisis, it's really that stage in a sequence where there's a turning point, there's a pivoting point where everything after that is determined by that crisis. So in this case, you're not going to get to your destination, and now it's about survival, and everything that you do from there on has changed. From a business perspective, then, as we think about a crisis, it's when that organization is confronted with that significant business risk, and that changes the trajectory. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide here regarding the EUMDR. Now, the EUMDR has, in many articles now, you see people use quotation marks, the EUMDR crisis. Well, the EUMDR really wasn't a crisis when it began. As Andy said, for those organizations, and we know of organizations that adapted, evaluated, and executed, and they're in pretty good shape. For those organizations that didn't do that, for whatever reason, whatever the reason they didn't do that, they found out that there really was a turning point, that now they were in crisis. And some of the things that organizations did when they still could recertify under MDD, they did that, right, to give themselves a longer runway. But as that evolved, and that's not a possibility, some of the crisis management, do we have to take some of these things off the market, sunset, temporarily remove them as part of our crisis management? For many of these companies, innovation, right, their new product development engine was affected because how were they managed? Where were they getting the resources? Well, they were pulling the resources from their innovation space. The other thing is, and everyone's really been trying to manage this crisis, from organizations trying to manage it all the way to the European Commission, right? They've pushed it back, and now we're still in change yet. So we went from a challenge to a crisis, and now everyone is really trying to manage through that space. Now, when a crisis happens, you think of your car getting stuck in the ditch. You switch to a different mode, right? It was just before, it was a challenge shoveling it out, but now things pick up the pace. You're really trying to figure out, as time winds down, how to accomplish that. Well, that occurs within organizations as well. Things move to fast pace. Often there's some disorganization. If you think of the car example, if you had passengers, various folks are trying to think about and engage on how to get it out, whether it's to use a lever arm to push on the car, to a shovel, to dig in with their feet and hands, just all kinds of things. So there's often a little bit of disorganization that just is natural as they try and coalesce. And the other thing that happens is organizations naturally pull in what we would call the A players, right? These are the people that you believe are experienced in the space and can get it done. In the example of your car being stuck, that's calling in the tow truck. Those are the A players who can come in and certainly get the vehicle out. So all of this happens as you move into this crisis mode. Now, one of the things as you get in crisis, right, this certainly impacts the organization as they're trying to figure out what's their path through this crisis. More often, as Andy talked about, the resources get reallocated, and operations are disrupted, and there's not a lot of options there, right? Either you reallocate resources, either people resources or dollar resources, right? You hire a bunch of people, but either way, there's disruption, and often in that disruption, whether it's for a short period or a longer period, the current projects they had ongoing are delayed. There's financial risk. Often you can have revenues at risk if you're sunsetting, in the case of the EMDR, right? Revenues at risk, and your portfolio can become a little bit unpredictable as you're trying to figure your pathway through this crisis. Now, when that environment gets really tough, when things really get confusing, then you begin to see the impacts on the culture. Because when people begin to lose their faith in the management and getting this thing done and solving this issue, they begin to think about, do I really want to stay on this ship, or do I need to get off? And so you end up having retention issues, low morale. And if it really gets to the next stage where people are talking about it more broadly, your reputation externally can be impacted, right? Customers, business partners, regulatory bodies, and even just the network of employees can really impact your reputation. So once you get in this space, how do you recover from that? What are the things that are important to do? So first of all, it's important to triage. When people hear the word triage, sometimes you think about, a catastrophic event where a bunch of people are hurt. They all can't get into the emergency room. There's some triage. So this is important to figure out what you have to do versus what you can do. Once you do that and you figure out what has to be done, then you can get some management support. You can get their alignment. That will absolutely be key in a crisis in order to do the next stages. One thing that's absolutely paramount in a crisis is change management. Now, Andy talked about change management from a disruption, and it's important there. It becomes even more important when you're in crisis. Why? Because things are moving quickly and there's a rapid evolution. And how do you make sure everyone's on the same page, understanding and agreeing with the direction? You have to have that change management mindset. Communication is absolutely an urgency. We'll talk a little bit more about that, and a little bit more details on that in a moment. Organizations will sometimes create this A team or a tiger team. These are really teams of highly skilled resources, right? They're talented resources. Tiger team, if no one's heard of that, tiger team is actually an old military term, but it actually became more well known as an entity, an idea, a concept from Apollo 13. If anyone remembers Apollo 13, it exploded in space, and just trying to get that aircraft back home, what they did is they assembled a tiger team. And those were folks who were highly skilled on every part of the aircraft, highly skilled as pilots. They had that, and they also had people who were highly skilled in organizing and executing this effort in an urgent environment. Now, you may not have those folks, kind of a full complement of those folks. And if you don't, look for an organization that does, who is used to and able to manage in that space. really key elements for what we would call the tiger team, right? And it's just a term, but ultimately, what's the composition of that? Well, first, you got to have really excellent leadership. Now, these folks, they see the issue, they own the issue, they're dealing with the issue, they own the problem and the solution. They are absolutely committed, they live and die by its success. Those leaders are capable of managing in intense environments. So if you think about intense environments, right, these are the guys that are on the battlefield, and the so to speak, the bullets are flying and they're completely calm and they're laying out the trajectory and keeping people in order. That's the kind of leadership that is really valuable when you get in these situations. Doesn't take anything away from the resources. The resources that are in here, they're dedicated to this. When I mean dedicated, I don't mean committed, but they're not doing this part-time. They're in this and they are committed 100% to this work. They're properly skilled. What does that mean? These folks don't have to come up to speed. You don't need to teach them the how to do the thing they're doing. You just need to be able to define what they're doing. And obviously their roles are very clear. We talked a little bit about communication. Communication is absolutely king in this environment. In some of the places where we've actually managed through a business crisis, things change very rapidly. And if you have someone operating on yesterday's information, but it's no longer valid today, you've wasted that person's time and you've taken away from progress on your trajectory. So you need to plan it out. You have to figure out the cadence, who it's going to, what they're getting, when, etc. And it has to be really first and foremost in this effort, so that all of these people are on the same page and well informed and well aligned. And then, of course, the planning. And one of the things that's a little different here, clearly you involve stakeholders in planning, but who are those stakeholders? It's the folks who are going to manage the crisis and get through the crisis. But you also have to think about the impacts of that crisis on the rest of the organization and include those folks, right? Because they have to commit to solving this problem with you, and they're going to have to deal with the outcomes as you close this thing out. Let's see here. Yep, there we go. So we at IPM, we've put together kind of a plan, do, check, act circle of activity. What you'll notice a little bit different than just project planning is there's that triage phase. And we're going to walk through and just talk about these different phases briefly, just to give you a flavor of that. So in the triage phase, I talked about the leader. You have to absolutely have that person identified who can do all the things I've described to lead that response. That person is going to very quickly get their arms around the scope of the problem and what it's going to take. Right there, that first line, pulling all the things in. Very quickly, then they will get aligned with leadership and give them essentially the lowdown. How big is this thing? What's our preliminary response? What's the cost of this thing going to look like? So management can start to assign and align all of the resources, whether it's dollar or people. That leader of that program will then go with the alignment leadership. Now they have the alignment. All right, identify all the support that's needed, and they will work on securing very quickly in the triage phase those commitments. As I said, they have to have a communication strategy. They'll do that early. And maybe what's a little bit different is you have to look bigger than the crisis on all of the people who are going to be affected. There may be some third-party partners, certainly in the EU MDR, there were lots of third-party partners that are impacted by this, that organizations need to deal with. And of course, early on, just really understanding the risks and constraints that that this thing's going to face. Now, when we get to the planning, you guys probably look at this, right? Work breakdown, structure, durations, all of those things, and you're saying to yourself, and you should, this looks just like any project management effort. I agree. There's just a couple differences. Now, as you look at this road, you can imagine yourself on the road. You're coming up, creating the work breakdown, define durations. But now imagine normal project, your car's going about 40. In crisis, let's take it up to 80. So all of those activities are moving a lot faster, a lot more urgency. The other thing is you'll see the block that says identify business impacts. When you manage in a crisis, you have to look at the impact of the crisis on the whole business, because management needs to know what those impacts are so that those can later be managed. So that is a key part of planning this out. One of the things in planning that's absolutely key part when you're dealing with a crisis is you don't want collateral damage. Anyone who's tried to get a vehicle out, in our example, out of the snow has come up with clever ways of maybe doing that, right? Taking your floor mats and putting them under the tires, or getting something to use as a lever arm to lift the vehicle and push it back, or get a bunch of people to push on the car. Well, some of the things that can happen with that, right? You can dent up cars and ruin floor mats. All of those are examples of collateral damage in that example. Or, God forbid, the time when you get in the car and you're so desperate to get it out that you're going between forward and reverse rapidly to see if you can rock it out. And then you do get it out, but as soon as you start moving, you find out that the transmission has been damaged, and now you've created another crisis and you're still stuck. So part of the planning is do this well. You want to minimize other surprises, get away from other potential problems. You want to have contingency plans, and by all means, you don't want to create another crisis in the business that you have to deal with. So when you get into the execution phase, just a couple notes here. Some of this will, again, feel like normal project management. Some of it'll feel a little bit different. When you're in a crisis, you want obviously to have disciplined execution, but you want to tackle the big problems first, get those out of the way. Those are the must-have, right? Part of the triage, the must-have. And then if you can fix things as you learn about them, right? If you can do that along the path without losing traction and speed, absolutely. When you can't, disposition those tasks that can't be fixed. Those are going to go on, some sort of a parking lot, but management, your management will know about that so that those can be dealt with later. In the case of, for example, the EUMDR, if you think about that, there are a bunch of tasks that may be moved into sustaining engineering, things that couldn't be done in order to get through the EUMDR gauntlet, but that need to be done. All right, so those get dispositioned and probably moved to sustaining or other functional areas to get done. Clearly want to determine and resolve issues. And we talked about the communication and change management. I just reiterate, these are absolutely important that the leader of that crisis, of managing this crisis, understands communication and change management and how to apply change management to align everyone, and how to use communication to make sure that everyone is properly informed along the way. Now, as you get to closure of this, right? So you've done your triage, you're planning, you've executed, you're starting to wind things down. You want to make sure that everything that you kind of had in that crisis from the beginning or acquired along the way, that's resolved. all of the issues that came up that were discovered but not resolved as part of your crisis, UMDR is a great example of things that are likely to come out of that you want to pull out of that particular pathway for managing that crisis. Those need to be dealt with later and resolved. And that you may also have some collateral damage, right? So what does that look like if projects were delayed? What can you do about trying to get those on track? If projects needed to be products need to be taken off the market, what's the next step there, etc. As you get to closing this, making sure that the organization understands what happened, and what the situation is, both of closing out the crisis and what's next, is absolutely important to get that realignment. You're going to end up readjusting your project portfolio most likely, and reassigning resources that needed to help with the crisis. Now, I will say one of the things with a crisis, some organizations bring a lot of outside resources, SME effort, but ultimately one of the things that's always true is they have to rely on internal resources that know products, processes, etc. They are the folks who have tribal knowledge, and time is going to be, even in that case, are going to be used. So you'll end up reassigning those. And then anything you learned along the way in managing this thing, take that forward, because these kind of challenges that turn into crises, they're going to reoccur. Okay, a few takeaways. First of all, Andy talked about reducing the disruption, just having that adaptive organization, the right processes, right? This is about, not, so to speak, this is about not getting caught with your pants down, just figuring out how to do things well and adapt to the changes. If you find that you're may end up having disruptive, you will have disruptive events, but how to manage those, have a good process for that. You know, when I think of one of the disruptive events that happens is unannounced FDA visits, right? Throws the whole organization off. But most organizations actually have a protocol for how to manage an unannounced FDA visit. One can extrapolate that to other compliance challenges that come up. And then if you do find yourself in that crisis, invest the effort on the front end into triage and planning. That will absolutely minimize really the disruption inside managing that crisis. Absolutely, absolutely key. So what I'm going to do is close out with that. If there's questions, please put them in the question and answer. We can answer those. Again, this is recorded, so you'll have that that availability after this is over. So right now, open for questions. Any questions that folks have?
So Tim, one question came in from Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work within the organization to get buy-in to this process?
So let me, Amanda, let me answer that one. First of all, as you asked the question, how do you work within the organization to get buy-in? Are you talking about getting buy-in to a crisis, kind of a crisis management process, or kind of the, how do you get buy-in on managing the actual crisis? And I guess I can answer both. First, you know, as you think about the management, particularly what's interesting as we work with organizations coming out of this EUMDR and really talking to them about how do you manage when you get in, I see Amanda, you said both, how do you manage when you get into these places, really making them aware that if you took a different approach, and golly, we've seen just a lot of this with the EUMDR, particularly the folks who find them in crisis, themselves in crisis, is getting them to understand that if they had managed this differently, whether it means being adaptive or how do you manage through a crisis, really causes them to think this is saving dollars. You know, all of the impacts of that, saving those things, whether it's culture or disruption, financial disruption, product portfolio disruption. Then if you're with an organization that's already in crisis, they haven't thought about this, really it's about that leader and being able to get that leader in place. And then that leader brings all of that data. And for an organization that this is a little bit new for, it's really getting in front of that management and being crystal clear about the situation, what needs to be done, and what it's going to cost, and all of those elements that we talked about. If that is done really well, then management, there's buy-in, right? Because they see the risk of not doing that. So hopefully that answered that, Amanda.
Looks like it did.
Perfect. All right, thanks for that question, Amanda. If there's other questions, our email addresses are currently on the screen. And again, this is recorded, so you'll have access to that. Please feel free to send those, and we can even set up time to chat, and we can share a little bit more about our experiences managing crisis. And we've certainly managed those from EUMDR to consent decrees, and really worked in these environments, so we can share some experiences. With that, I will thank you guys for joining me on this Tuesday, and bid you farewell.
Yeah, and also thanks to Medical Alley for the opportunity. This is really appreciated. So thanks, everyone.